Hello, and welcome to the arcade. You know, I may not be the most hardcore fan, but I have been playing the series since about 2006 when I got Monster Hunter 1 for the PS2. Ever since I was young, I've been enthralled by the aesthetic of these games. The atmosphere is incredible, and it's helped by the graphics, the music, the locations, the ecology of the games, and of course, the weapons, armor, and the monsters. It's one of those series that never gets old for me. And while I do think the series has strayed just a bit too far from its roots these days, I still consider it my favorite game series of all time. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about Monster Hunter, my journey with the series, and what these games mean to me.
I discovered Monster Hunter during a transitional time in my life when my large family moved into a small house while we were waiting for our new one to finish getting built. I was caught between the excitement of moving into a new neighborhood and a bigger house, and the fear of being so much farther away from all the friends I had in my old neighborhood. We were only in that transitional house for about 9 months, but it felt so much longer to me. I felt like I went through so many phases during that time, and the only thing that remained the same in my life was my love for video games. I played a ton of SOCOM 3, Battle for Middle-earth, but when I finally got Monster Hunter, that was my go-to game for the rest of the time we were in that house. I was never allowed to own or play the Grand Theft Auto games as a kid, so I was always looking for alternatives. I was in search of an open-world action-adventure when I came across a listing on eBay for a PS2 game called Monster Hunter. And I distinctly remember that the eBay listing said that it was an open-world game. The box looked so cool, and I looked up the trailer on GameTrailers.com. I loved the cinematic, the look of the weapons, the squad-based hunting party, and the creature design, so I convinced my parents to let me get it. When it arrived a week later, I was disappointed to find out that not only was it not an open-world game, but it was also not really an adventure game either, but more of an action RPG. Still, since I was young, I didn't really have much choice but to play it anyway, so I tried it out. And I fell in love with the Monster Hunter series right then and there. I remember sitting in that room for hours and hours during that summer, playing as much as my twin brother would let me since we shared the PS2 at that point. And I still remember having Hybrid Theory by Linkin Park on repeat as I blasted through the single-player story before finally leveling up my game and taking the hunt online. Monster Hunter was one of my first online experiences in gaming, right behind the SOCOM series and Battle for Middle-earth. But opposed to those games, it was a co-op experience instead of playing versus each other, and something I really enjoyed even though I typically don't play any other online PvE type games outside of Monster Hunter. And then in 2007, I got Monster Hunter Freedom 2 for the PSP. In 2007, I was the coolest kid in my homeschool group because I was the only one with a PSP. I was also the most annoying sibling in my family because I kept using our Blockbuster Game Pass on PSP games that I wouldn't let anyone else play. But that all changed when I was finally able to buy the first game that kept me entertained for more than a couple of hours, Monster Hunter Freedom 2. Not only did I now have a game that could keep me completely distracted from homework, sports, and family time, but now I had one that I could take anywhere. That meant even less time for those things. Now, but to be honest, while I did put over 40 hours into Freedom 2, I wasn't really committed to handheld Monster Hunter until 2009 when I got Monster Hunter Freedom Unite for the PSP. I'll be honest with you, I was shocked and a little disappointed to find out that this was the same game as Monster Hunter Freedom 2. Until later I realized that I was wrong and it was a massively expanded and upgraded version of Freedom 2, and my shock and disappointment lessened a bit. But I was expecting a full sequel, and while what I got was an incredible upgrade, I was definitely a little indifferent to it at first. But after I got over that hump, man, this was probably the first non-PC game that I put more than 100 hours into. I just couldn't stop. It was an addiction. I barely remember touching my PS2, PS3, or PC for most of that summer. And then, in 2010, I pre-ordered a video game with my own money for the first time in my life. And that game was Monster Hunter Tri for the Wii. I also convinced my best friend to get it since we both had Wiis and Wi-Fi at that point, so I knew we'd be doing some online hunting together. In my opinion, Monster Hunter Tri is when the Monster Hunter games became a true worldwide phenomenon. The presentation was on another level to what had been done before, with bigger and more cinematic battles, a better online component, new mechanics, expanded lore, and epic new monsters to hunt. Overall, I would actually say that Monster Hunter Tri is a masterpiece that stands out from the rest as a pioneer and big leap forward for the series. Sure, some people complain about the underwater battles, but my best friend and I loved them. Well, some of them. And the Lagiacrus is now one of the most iconic monsters in the series. I also really love the big epic battles like the Cedius and the Gen Moran. The first time you beat both of these bad boys, let me tell you, there is nothing like it. And in 2013, as soon as Monster Hunter 3 came out again, I bought it again, this time for the 3DS. It had been over a year since I'd finished playing Monster Hunter Tri, and I was itching to get back into the hunt. And while Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate is mostly the same game as Tri, there were plenty of updates to the experience, similar to how Freedom Unite upgraded from Freedom 2. But the biggest thing that changed with the handheld experience for me was the addition of the lock-on camera system. Gone were the days of taking your hand off the attack and action buttons to swing the camera back around to a Rathian that just dive-bombed past your head. Gone were the days of getting body-checked by a Diablos because you decided you should look around for somewhere to hide, take your hand off the controls for 1 second, and then get obliterated. And to be honest, it wasn't really that great of an upgrade. It definitely helped the handheld experience, but not as much as this ugly ashtray of an expansion, the 3DS Circle Pad Pro, or as I like to call it, the Monster Hunter controller thing. At some point, I also got the Wii U version of this game so I could swap my save file over to my brand new HD Nintendo system, but I didn't keep it on there for very long. It just always felt off to play Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate with the Wii U gamepad, and I never owned a Wii U Pro controller, so I just kept my save on the 3DS. To be fair, I didn't really have any other 3DS games at the time anyway, so it was really just an excuse to use it, but I digress. 2015 was when I got 3 Ultimate for the Wii U, and to be honest, I really did not play this game very much on the Wii U. At the time, this was the best looking Monster Hunter game that I was aware of, and it was nice to see it on a much bigger screen than the 3DS, but it just never felt right to me using that Wii U gamepad. And then in 2016, I got my second 3DS game, Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate. This game is when I started to notice more of my friends getting interested in Monster Hunter that had never tried it before. It's hard to explain exactly, but the controls in this game were, depending on how you look at it, either massively improved or just made with more modern sensibilities in mind. In 4 Ultimate, you can essentially parkour and even Spider-Man your way through the landscape while you're hunting. No more standing as still as possible in order to jump up a ledge and whatnot. Just barrel through and pray you don't end up running straight into a giant set of jaws. Seriously though, sprinting, climbing, and jumping were also radically changed that at first this didn't even feel like a Monster Hunter game to me. But that said, I grew to love it, and I feel like the developers were just giving the player more tools to hunt monsters in their own way. The other biggest change for me personally was that the Charge Blade weapon type was added to the series, and baby, I will never go back. The Charge Blade is all the best parts of the Sword and Shield weapon type combined with the best parts of the Greatsword. Similar to how the Switch Axe could change shape as well, but the combos that you can pull off with the Charge Blade just feel so much better in my opinion. I only played a little bit of the online for 4 Ultimate, but I enjoyed every minute that I played this game. It felt like the first step in the new direction that the Monster Hunter series was taking, and little did I know how solidified that new direction would be with the next game that I want to talk about. Monster Hunter World, which I bought for the PlayStation 4 in 2018. And in 2018, I played through the first 50 hours of the story mode, got stuck on the last fight, and promptly shelved the game for over a year. It wasn't until late 2019, early 2020 that I started playing World again. And I easily dropped another 100 hours into it, almost 160 if you combine my time between the base game and the expansion. Monster Hunter World is an incredible game. A ton of improvements have been made to the formula, especially when it comes to resource gathering both during and outside of actual hunts. There were shortcuts given to less experienced hunters, like the Defender armor and weapons set, which understandably not all longtime fans appreciated, but regardless of how good of a deal newbies were getting, I think the entire player base benefited from that, with an unbelievable increase in the amount of good players that could help you through missions you got stuck on and monsters you just couldn't beat on your own. It also streamlined getting right into the battles, and it took away that initial heap of tedious tutorial missions and pretty much plopped players right into the action. Seriously, it is crazy how fast you get to the Anjanath in this game, the flagship monster on the cover. I love Monster Hunter World, and while I do think it's been a bit dumbed down for all you idiot baby gamers out there who have never played a Monster Hunter game before, it is actually a fantastic modernization of the Monster Hunter formula and has a little something for everyone. Then in 2020, during the lockdowns, I was able to snag a Nintendo Switch from the closest Walmart at the time. I usually checked that Walmart every week, or really every day actually, but I was being safe, I swear. And one day, it was finally there. It was one of those weird things, like I had been there so many times looking for a Switch and had never seen one, so that when finally a Switch showed up on a random Tuesday, I saw the box for it and I was like, get this thing out of my way so I can see if there's any Nintendo Switches on the shelf. I literally did not know what the box looked like, so I didn't know what I was looking at. But once I finally snapped out of it, I grabbed a Switch, a copy of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and skirted many responsibilities for the rest of the day while I geeked out about getting a brand new video game console for the first time since I got my PS4 back in 2014. After about a week of playing only Mario Kart 8 on my Switch, it felt like it was time to try something new. So I hopped on the eShop to see what they had. And sure enough, Monster Hunter Generations caught my eye, and I grabbed that bad boy right up. Sadly, I didn't really play it as much as I should have. I was into the ease and new user-friendliness of Monster Hunter World, and I felt like I just couldn't be bothered to come to a complete standstill to drink a Mega Potion anymore. I will always regret skipping that game during that time, but we will come back to Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate. Later in 2020 is when me and my little brother got Iceborne for PS4, and we played it a lot together. It does hurt when you realize that all the weapons and armor you grinded for hours and hours in the base game of World are just completely useless when you first start in Iceborne, but if you're able to look at it as a sequel instead of just an expansion, then it doesn't hurt quite as bad. And you'll probably forget all about that quickly anyway, because there are a lot of cool new locations, monsters, and weapons and armor sets to get in Iceborne. That's what each new Monster Hunter game is about, right? And that's why Iceborne no longer feels like an expansion to me. Really, it feels like a full-on sequel. Then, in 2021, I bought Monster Hunter Rise for the Nintendo Switch. I could not resist the hype, and I bought it on day one, which I typically don't ever do. I flew through the main story in about 15 hours, and then continued on for another 45 hours or so into the endgame content. I've never had more fun playing with random teammates in a Monster Hunter game online. At first, it did feel like there wasn't as much to this game as previous entries, but once Capcom started releasing more and more endgame content, I started to really enjoy my time with the game. However, something has always just felt a little bit off to me. To be honest, it actually started with Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, but World and Rise have that off kind of feeling just a little bit stronger. It feels like the series is losing its old identity, which may not be a bad thing to some, and that's totally fine. But for me, with how streamlined everything was getting, I didn't feel like I had to earn all of this stuff that I was accomplishing quite as much as previous entries. Sure, the old formula wasn't perfect, but Rise felt like it was such a stark departure from the old Monster Hunter grind that it barely felt like a sequel to me. And that's why recently I've gone back to Generations Ultimate for now. It just feels more like the old Monster Hunter again, which I love. Don't get me wrong, World and Rise are fantastic games, but I just might prefer the old Monster Hunter style a little bit more. Things were harder, sure, but it just made it all the more satisfying when you finally got that piece of loot you were after so you could craft that next weapon or armor piece you really been wanting.
I don't want to sound like a snob. I'm really glad so many new players have been introduced to the Monster Hunter series through the success of Monster Hunter World and Rise. But that said, I really do wish Capcom would go back to the older style of Monster Hunter, similar to how it was done in Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate. With as much polish as Capcom games have these days, it would be amazing to see what a classic Monster Hunter formula-styled game could look like on the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. And that's all I've got. Monster Hunter means a lot to me, and I still go back to each and every one of these entries in the series from time to time, with Generations Ultimate being my current go-to game. But what about you? Do you play Monster Hunter? And if so, what's your favorite Monster Hunter game? Do you like the new style of World and Rise, or do you prefer the older style of Generations Ultimate? Let me know in the comments section below, and thank you so much for watching.